The message arrived on a Tuesday morning in the year 2247. It came through every channel that humanity had built to reach the stars. Radio waves, quantum links, and direct transmission all carried the same words from the Galactic Council. Earth had 72 hours to surrender. Admiral Tor stood in the command center of Earth's orbital station and read the message 3 times. She was a tall woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that had seen too many battles to count. The words on the screen were clear enough. The Galactic Council, a governing body of 47 alien species that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years, had decided that humanity was a threat. They demanded complete military surrender, political integration, and what they called protective oversight of human civilization. Tors picked up her communicator and called Secretary General. He answered within seconds. "I assume you have seen it," she said. "I have seen it," replied. His voice was calm, but Tors could hear something beneath the calm. It was not fear. It was something closer to disbelief. "They want us to give up everything we have built in exchange for their protection." "That is one way to describe it," Tors said. "Another way would be slavery with extra steps." Was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Call Ambassador Price. Tell her to meet us at the Geneva Summit Hall in 3 hours, and tell her to bring her sense of humor. I think we are going to need it." 3 hours later, the leaders of the United Earth government sat around a long table in the most secure room on the planet. Ambassador Karen Price had arrived directly from the council station at the edge of the solar system. She was a small woman with sharp features and a mind that had outmaneuvered diplomats from a dozen species. She placed a data tablet on the table and looked around at the assembled faces. "They are serious," Price said. "High Arbiter Hal of the delivered the ultimatum personally. He expects us to accept. In his 1,200 years of service, no species has ever refused integration." "Then he has never met humans," said General Rick from across the table. He was the commander of Earth's ground forces and had a reputation for speaking his mind. Price nodded slowly. "I tried to explain that to him. I told him about our history, our wars, our revolutions, our habit of fighting against impossible odds. He listened politely and then told me that every young species believes itself to be special. He said we would learn humility in time." Secretary General leaned back in his chair. He was a man in his 60s with a kind face that hid a sharp political mind. He had led Earth through first contact, through the early negotiations with alien traders, and through the tense years when humanity learned just how small they were in a galaxy full of ancient empires. Now he faced the biggest decision of his career. "What happens if we refuse?" he asked. "They send a fleet," Price said simply. "They have done it before. The refused integration 8,000 years ago. The Council sent 500 warships and the war lasted 3 days. There have been loyal members ever since." "How many warships does the Council have in total?" Admiral Tors asked. "Current estimates suggest around 15,000 combat-ready vessels," Price replied. "Earth has 63. The room fell silent. Tors looked at the faces around her. She saw fear in some eyes. She saw anger in others. But she also saw something else. Something that she had seen in human eyes throughout history whenever someone told them that they could not win. She saw stubbornness. Secretary General stood up slowly. He walked to the window and looked out at the city below. Millions of people lived their lives down there, unaware that their future was being decided in this room. He thought about his children and his. He thought about every human who had ever refused to kneel. "Read me the ultimatum again," he said quietly. Ambassador Price picked up her tablet. "The Galactic Council, in its wisdom and mercy, offers the species known as humanity the opportunity for integration and protection. Earth will surrender all military vessels and weapons. Earth will accept Council governance in all matters of expansion and diplomacy. Earth will submit to protective oversight for a period of no less than 500 standard years. Failure to accept this offer will result in enforcement action. You have 72 hours. Turned around. There was a strange expression on his face. It took Tors a moment to recognize it. He was smiling. They offer us mercy, said. They offer us protection. They offer us the chance to kneel and be grateful for the boot on our necks. He shook his head slowly. Do they know anything about us at all? General let out a short laugh. Then Admiral Tors found herself smiling too. Within moments, the entire room was filled with quiet laughter. It was not the laughter of people who had lost their minds. It was the laughter of people who had just realized something important. The Galactic Council had made a terrible mistake. Draft our response, said to Ambassador Price. Keep it short. Price nodded. What would you like it to say? Thought for a moment, then he smiled again. We respectfully decline. Try again never. The message was sent within the hour. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds that had long ago learned to obey the Council, alien beings watched their screens in disbelief. No one refused the Council. No one had ever refused the Council. Until now. On the Council of Prime, High Arbiter Hal read the human response 3 times. His gray skin turned pale and his 4 eyes blinked in confusion. His assistant asked him what was wrong. They laughed at us, Hal said quietly. They actually laughed. He had been an arbiter for over 1,000 years. He had overseen the integration of 11 species. He had never once encountered anything like this. Prepare the demonstration fleet, he ordered. 200 warships. These humans need to learn respect. Back on Earth, Admiral Tors stood at her command console and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, a fleet was being assembled to crush humanity into submission. The odds were impossible. The enemy was ancient and powerful. Tors smiled. Let them come, she whispered to herself. Let them come and see what happens when you try to make humans kneel. The 72 hours had begun. The council chamber on Prime was a massive dome of crystal and light. It had stood for 12,000 years as a symbol of galactic order. Delegates from 47 species filled the curved seats that rose toward the ceiling. They had gathered to witness what they believed would be a routine matter, the integration of another young species. High Arbiter Hal stood at the central podium. His gray robes flowed around his thin body and his 4 eyes scanned the assembly. He had expected to announce humanity's surrender. Instead, he had to explain their refusal. The humans have rejected our offer, he said. His voice echoed through the chamber. They have done so with words that border on insult. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A delegate from a species of tall rose from his seat. Perhaps they did not understand the terms, he suggested. Young species often lack the wisdom to see beyond their own pride. They understood perfectly, Hal replied. Their ambassador made that clear. They simply do not care. In the upper rows of the chamber, a small figure watched the proceedings with great interest. Scholar Elva was old even by her species standards. She had spent 3 centuries studying the rise and fall of civilizations. When humanity had first appeared on the galactic stage 5 years ago, she had begun collecting every piece of information she could find about them. What she had learned frightened her. She rose from her seat and descended the steps toward the podium. Hal watched her approach with poorly hidden annoyance. They were tolerated in council affairs but rarely respected. They had been conquered too long ago to matter. High Arbiter, El said, I request permission to address the assembly. This is not the time for academic lectures, Hal replied. With respect, High Arbiter, I believe it is exactly the time. She turned to face the assembled delegates. I have studied humanity for 5 years. I have read their histories, their literature, their records of war and peace. I must warn this council. We are making a terrible mistake. Laughter echoed through the chamber. A delegate from the shouted down at her. You warn us about a species with 60 ships, against our thousands. Elle did not flinch. I warn you about a species that has never stopped fighting, not once in their entire history. She held up a data tablet. In the past 500 years alone, humans have fought over 400 wars among themselves. They have survived plagues that killed half their population. They have recovered from weapons that poisoned their own world. Every time they should have died, they survived. Every time they should have surrendered, they fought harder. The laughter faded. Hal stepped forward. You speak of primitive conflicts, he said. They have never faced the Council. No, Elle agreed. They have not, but consider this. They were a spacefaring civilization for 2,000 years when the Council came for us. We lasted 3 days. Humanity has been in space for barely 2 centuries. They have 60 ships against our 200, and yet they laughed at your ultimatum. She paused. Does that not concern you? The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Hal waved his hand dismissively. Prepare the fleet, he ordered. We will teach these humans the same lesson we taught your people, scholar. Submission is not optional. Elle bowed her head and returned to her seat. But as she climbed the steps, she made a quiet decision. She would watch what happened next very carefully, and if the humans proved to be what she suspected, she would find a way to help them. Far across the galaxy, Earth was preparing for war. Commander Jake Murray stood on the bridge of the ESV Relentless and watched his crew work. They were young, most of them. The oldest was barely 40. None of them had ever faced combat against an alien fleet. None of them had ever tested their training against enemies who had conquered civilizations for. Murray was 53 years old. He had fought in the border conflicts near Mars. He had served in the patrol fleets that guarded Earth's new colonies. He knew what battle felt like, but this was different. Sir, his communications officer said, Admiral Torres is on the line. Murray nodded and activated the screen at his station. Torres appeared, looking tired but alert. Jake, she said, I need volunteers for a reconnaissance mission. We need to know what the Council is bringing against us. I volunteer the Relentless, Murray said without hesitation. Torres smiled slightly. I expected you would. Take 2 escort ships with you. Get close enough to count their fleet. Get back alive. That is your only mission. Understood, Admiral. The screen went dark. Murray turned to his crew. They were looking at him with a mixture of fear and determination. He recognized that look. He had seen it in mirrors throughout his career. You heard the Admiral, he said. Set course for Council space, best speed. The Relentless jumped to faster-than-light travel and vanished from Earth's sensors. Meanwhile, news of humanity's defiance spread through the galaxy in ways the Council could not control. Traders carried the story to distant stations. Independent worlds whispered about the species that had refused to kneel. On planets that had spent centuries under Council rule, beings began to wonder if they had accepted submission too easily. On the trading station of Nexus 4, a group of merchants from 6 different species gathered around a display screen. They watched the recording of Secretary General's response to the ultimatum. They will be destroyed, said a trader. The Council will crush them. Perhaps, said a merchant. He was old and had seen many things in his long life. But I have traded with humans for 3 years now. They are strange creatures, unpredictable, stubborn beyond reason. He shook his head slowly. I would not bet against them too quickly. The laughed, then you are a fool. Maybe, the agreed. But I think I will hold my bets until we see what happens. Fools have won before. Back on Earth, Secretary General addressed the planet. His face appeared on every screen, in every home, on every station in the solar system. My fellow humans, he said, you have heard that the Galactic Council has demanded our surrender. You have heard that a fleet is coming to force us to our knees. He paused. I want you to know that we will not kneel. We did not build our civilization to hand it over to strangers who think they know better than us. We did not reach the stars to become servants. He leaned forward slightly. They think we are young and foolish. They think we do not understand what we are facing, but they are wrong. We understand perfectly. We simply refuse to be afraid. Across Earth, in homes and stations and ships, humans watched their leader speak, and slowly, one by one, they began to smile. The galaxy was watching, and humanity was ready to show them something they had never seen before. The Council fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. 200 warships arranged themselves in perfect formation. Their hulls gleamed with the silver and gold colors of Council authority. Each ship was massive, built over centuries of conquest and refinement. Their weapons had broken empires. Their commanders had never known defeat. High Arbiter Hal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Judgment. He watched the tactical display and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This would be a simple matter, a demonstration of power. The humans would see their hopeless position and finally understand what they faced. "Scan for enemy vessels," he ordered. His tactical officer bent over his console. A moment later, he looked up with confusion in his eyes. "High Arbiter, I am detecting human ships. 60 vessels in defensive formation near the 4th planet." Hal blinked all 4 eyes in surprise. "They are not hiding. They are not running." "No, High Arbiter, they appear to be waiting for us." On the bridge of the ESV Defiant, Admiral Torres watched the Council fleet approach. Her own ships were arranged in a crescent formation around Mars. 60 vessels against 200. The numbers were not in her favor. They never had been. Torres smiled. "Open a channel to all ships," she said. "This is Admiral Torres. You all know why we are here. You all know what is coming. The Council thinks we will break. They think we will run. They are wrong." She paused. "Today we show them what humanity is made of. Hold your positions, trust your training, and remember who you are fighting for." She closed the channel and turned to her communications officer. "Is the Council flagship hailing us?" "Yes, Admiral. High Arbiter Hal wishes to speak with you." "Put him through." The alien's face appeared on the main screen. He looked old and proud and utterly certain of his victory. "Admiral Torres," Hal said, "I give you one final opportunity. Surrender your fleet and your world will be treated with mercy. Continue this foolishness and you will be destroyed." Torres said nothing. She simply stared at the screen in silence. Hal waited for a response. When none came, his gray skin darkened with anger. "Do you have nothing to say?" Torres smiled. "I think you will find that actions speak louder than words, High Arbiter." She cut the transmission. "All ships," she ordered, "engage." The Battle of Saul began with a roar of engines and weapons fire. Human ships surged forward in patterns that no Council tactician had ever seen. They did not form neat lines. They did not follow predictable attack vectors. They wove through space like angry hornets, striking and retreating and striking again. Lieutenant Chris Wade led the fighter squadron known as the Ghost Hawks. He was 28 years old and had dreamed of flying since he was a child. Now he flew into the heart of an alien armada with nothing but his skills and his courage. "Ghost Hawks," he called to his squadron, "follow my lead. We are going straight through them." His pilots did not hesitate. 20 fighters dove directly into the Council formation. It was a tactic that no sane military doctrine would recommend. Flying into the heart of an enemy fleet meant being surrounded, outnumbered, and from every direction. It was also completely unexpected. Council gunners tried to track the tiny human fighters, but they were too fast and too unpredictable. Wade and his pilots tore through the formation, targeting engine ports and weapon systems with precise strikes. They were not trying to destroy the massive warships. They were trying to blind them and slow them down. "I have 3 on my tail," called one of Wade's pilots. "Break left and dive," Wade replied. "I am coming around." He spun his fighter in a maneuver that would have killed a pilot without human reflexes. His weapons found the pursuing ships, and 2 of them exploded. The third veered away. Across the battlefield, the human fleet was taking damage. The ESV Courage took a direct hit to its engines and began to drift. The ESV Liberty lost its main weapons array, but they kept fighting. Every human ship continued to fire, continued to move, continued to resist. Hal watched the battle unfold with growing disbelief. His tactical display showed red icons where his ships had been destroyed. 12, 20, 30. The humans were dying too, but not fast enough. High Arbiter, his tactical officer said, "We have lost 43 vessels. Human losses are 12. "Impossible," Hal whispered. "We outnumber them more than 3-1. Their tactics are unlike anything in our records. They do not fight like any species we have encountered." Hal stared at the screen. The humans were not winning. They could not win. But they were not losing the way they should have been losing. They were fighting with a ferocity and creativity that his commanders could not predict or counter. He made a decision that he had never made before in his long career. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Tactical withdrawal, reform at the system edge." His officers stared at him in shock. The Council did not retreat. The Council had never retreated. "High Arbiter, are you certain?" "Do it," Hal snapped. "We need to reassess our approach." The Council fleet pulled back. Human ships did not pursue. They held their formation and watched their enemy retreat. On the bridge of the Defiant, Admiral Torres let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her crew erupted in cheers around her. They had done the impossible. They had fought the Galactic Council and lived. Torres held up her hand for silence. "This is not over," she said quietly. "They will come back. They will bring more ships. We have won a battle, not a war." She looked at the faces of her crew. "But today we showed them something important. We showed them that humanity does not break." Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread like fire. The mighty Council, undefeated had retreated from a species they had dismissed as insignificant. On worlds that had long ago accepted submission, beings watched the recordings with wonder and disbelief. On Prime, Scholar L watched the tactical data with tears in her ancient eyes. She had hoped the humans would surprise the Council. She had not dared to believe they would do this. In her quarters that night, she began to write a message. It would take careful planning to send it without being detected, but she knew now what she had to do. The humans needed allies, and she intended to help them find some. The Battle of Saul was over, but the war for the galaxy had just begun. 3 weeks had passed since the Battle of Saul. The galaxy had not stopped talking about it. On every station and every world, beings whispered about the humans who had made the Council retreat. Some called them foolish. Some called them brave. All of them watched to see what would happen next. Ambassador Karen Price traveled alone on a small diplomatic vessel. Her mission was secret and dangerous. She carried no weapons and no military escort. She carried only words and an offer that could change the future of the galaxy. Her first stop was a world called Minor. It was a cold planet on the edge of Council space, home to a species called the... They had been integrated into the Council 4,000 years ago. They had been obedient ever since. Price met with their leader in a small room beneath the surface. His name was Consul, and he was old and tired and afraid. "You should not have come here," said. "If the Council learns that I spoke with you, my people will suffer." "The Council is already preparing to make everyone suffer," Price replied. "They are building an invasion fleet, 2,000 ships. They will crush Earth, and then they will remind every other species what happens when someone defies them." Was silent for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because we are offering you a choice." Price leaned forward. "Join us, fight with us, help us show the galaxy that the Council can be beaten." "You are asking us to die," said. "I am asking you to live," Price replied. "Really live, not as servants, not as subjects, as free beings who decide their own future." Stared at her with his pale eyes. You believe you can win. I believe we have to try. And I believe that if enough species stand together, the Council cannot stop us all. The conversation lasted 3 more hours. When Price left Minor, she carried with her a secret promise. They would not fight openly, not yet, but when the time came, they would be ready. Price visited 6 more worlds over the following days. She spoke with leaders who had spent their lives obeying the Council. She offered them hope and she offered them choice. Some refused, some were too afraid, but others listened. Others remembered what freedom had felt like before the Council came. Meanwhile, on Prime, Scholar Elle took the greatest risk of her long life. She had spent 3 weeks preparing her escape. She had gathered copies of Council military data, fleet positions, and strategic weaknesses that the humans would need. She had arranged transport on a trader vessel whose captain asked no questions. Now she stood at the edge of the spaceport, waiting for her moment. Scholar Elle. She turned. A Council security officer stood behind her. His hand rested on his weapon. "You are required for questioning," the officer said. "Please come with me." Elle felt her heart's beating faster. She had been discovered. Everything she had planned would be lost. Then a voice spoke from behind the officer. "I think not." The officer turned. He never saw the blow that knocked him unconscious. Captain Maria Santos of the ESV Defiant stepped over his body and extended her hand to Elle. "Ambassador Price sent me," Santos said. "She said you had something important to share." Elle took her hand. "How did you get here? Council space is heavily guarded." Santos smiled. "We are humans. We are very good at going where we are not supposed to be." They escaped Prime that night. The Council did not discover Elle was missing until she was already halfway to Earth. Back on Earth, Secretary General prepared to speak to the galaxy. The broadcast would be transmitted through every channel that human traders and allies could access. It would reach worlds that had not heard an independent voice in thousands of years. Stood in a simple room with the blue flag of Earth behind him. He did not wear ceremonial clothes or stand behind an impressive podium. He looked like what he was, an ordinary man with an extraordinary message. "My name is," he began. "I speak to you as the leader of Earth, but more than that, I speak to you as someone who believes in freedom." His words were carried across the stars. "The Galactic Council tells you that obedience is safety. They tell you that submission is peace. But I ask you to remember what your ancestors knew before the Council came. They knew that freedom is worth fighting for. They knew that no being has the right to rule another without consent." On 100 worlds, beings gathered around screens to listen. Earth did not start this fight. We asked only to live in peace and make our own choices. The Council answered with threats and warships. They told us to kneel or die. We chose neither. Paused, his voice grew stronger. "We chose to stand, and we are asking you to stand with us, not as subjects of a new empire, not as followers of human leadership. We ask you to stand as equals, as partners, as free beings who refuse to kneel any longer." The broadcast ended. For a long moment the galaxy was silent. Then the responses began to arrive. 7 species sent secret messages to Earth. They were ready. They had been ready for centuries. They had only been waiting for someone to show them that resistance was possible. High Arbiter Hal learned of the broadcast within hours. His rage was terrible to behold. "They are spreading rebellion," he told the Council Assembly. "They are poisoning the minds of our subjects. We must accelerate the invasion. We must crush them before this infection spreads further." The Council agreed. The invasion fleet would launch in 2 weeks instead of 6. On Earth, Admiral Torres received the news with grim determination. "Then we do not have time to wait," she said. "We need to move first." The coalition fleet began to assemble in secret. 400 ships from 8 species. It was not enough to match the Council's 2,000, but it was more than anyone had thought possible. The humans had asked the galaxy to stand with them. And the galaxy was answering. The coalition fleet gathered at a hidden point between the stars. 400 ships from 8 species floated in formation, waiting for orders. Human vessels flew alongside cruisers and frigates. Beings who had never fought together now prepared to face an enemy that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. Admiral Tor stood on the bridge of the ESV Defiant and looked at the fleet she commanded. It was the strangest armada in galactic history. It was also the most hopeful. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "all ships are in position. The coalition commanders are awaiting your orders." Tors nodded. She had spent days planning this moment. The Council fleet of 2,000 warships was preparing to leave Prime. They expected to find Earth's 60 ships waiting helplessly for destruction. They did not know about the coalition. They did not know about the plan. "Open a channel to all ships," Tors ordered. "This is Admiral Tors. You all know why we are here. The Council believes that power comes from fear. They believe that obedience comes from force. Today we prove them wrong." She paused, looking at the stars on her screen. "We are not attacking Earth's enemies. We are attacking tyranny itself. We are showing the galaxy that free beings will not kneel. Some of us will not survive this day, but what we do here will echo through history. Our children and their children will remember that we stood together when it mattered most." Tors took a breath. "Set course for Prime, maximum speed." The coalition fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel and vanished into the darkness between stars. On Prime, High Arbiter Hal supervised the final preparations of his invasion fleet. 2,000 warships filled the orbital lanes above the Council. It was the largest military force assembled in 3,000 years. It would crush the human rebellion and restore order to the galaxy. "High Arbiter," an officer called out, "we are detecting ships entering the system." Hal turned. "The fleet is not scheduled to depart for 6 hours. "These are not our ships, High Arbiter, they appear to be human." Hal felt his blood turn cold. "How many?" The officer's voice shook as he answered. 400 vessels, multiple species signatures. High Arbiter, they are heading directly for Prime." For the first time in his 1,200 years of life, Hal knew fear. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had not waited to be attacked. They had brought the war to the Council's doorstep. "All ships defensive formation," he ordered. "Protect thee at all costs." The Council fleet scrambled to respond, but they were positioned for an outward attack, not an inward defense. Their formations were wrong. Their commanders were confused, and they were facing an enemy that did not fight by any rules they understood. The Battle of Prime began with fire and chaos. Tors drove her fleet straight into the heart of the Council armada. Her ships did not seek to destroy enemy vessels one by one. They sought to break through, to reach the planet below, to show every being on that world that the Council could not protect them. "All fighters launch," Tors commanded. "Target the flagship, make them focus on defense." Lieutenant Chris Wade led the Ghost Hawks into battle once again. His squadron dove toward the Eternal Judgment, forcing Hal to divert ships to protect himself. The distraction gave the Coalition time to push deeper into Council space. And then something remarkable happened. A cruiser suddenly stopped firing on Coalition ships, then another, then 5 more. Their commanders had made a choice. "This is captain of the vessel Distant Star," a voice crackled over the communication channels. "We are defecting to the Coalition. The Council no longer speaks for us." Across the battlefield, other ships began to follow. Species that had obeyed the Council for remembered the words of Secretary General. They remembered what freedom had meant before they surrendered it, and they chose to reclaim it. 15 species defected during the battle. 300 Council ships turned their weapons on their former allies. The armada that had seemed invincible began to tear itself apart. Hal watched his fleet collapse with horror in his eyes. Everything he had believed in, everything he had served for 1,000 years, was crumbling around him. "High Arbiter," his officer said quietly, "our losses are catastrophic. We cannot hold." Hal closed all four of his eyes. When he opened them again, something had changed in his ancient face. "Signal the human flagship," he said. "Request terms for negotiation." The battle ended not with the destruction of the Council, but with its transformation. 3 days later, Ambassador Corinne Price stood before an assembly unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Representatives from 63 species filled a great hall on Prime. Human diplomats sat beside beings who had tried to destroy them weeks ago. Former masters sat beside former servants. Secretary General addressed the assembly. "The Galactic Council is dissolved," he announced. "In its place, we propose something new. A galactic assembly where every species has an equal voice, where no one rules by force, where freedom is not granted by the powerful but recognized as the right of all beings." Scholar Elle sat in the front row, recording every word for the history she would write. She watched the human leader speak, and she thought about everything that had led to this moment. A young species had refused to kneel, and in refusing, they had changed the galaxy forever. The proposal passed by unanimous vote. As the assembly concluded, Ambassador Price found herself standing beside former High Arbiter Hal. He looked older than he had weeks ago, older and wiser. "I did not believe your species could do this," he admitted. "I thought you were simply too young and too foolish to understand your position." Price smiled. "We understood perfectly, we just refused to accept it." Hal made a sound that might have been laughter. "You know, when your Secretary General sent his response to our ultimatum, my officers asked me what we should do about beings who laughed at the Council. What did you tell them?" "I told them to teach you respect." Hal shook his head slowly. "I think perhaps you have taught us instead." That evening, the human delegation gathered for a quiet celebration. Admiral Torres raised a glass to her fellow officers. Lieutenant Wade sat with pilots from 6 different species, sharing stories of the battle. Secretary General spoke quietly with leaders who had once been enemies. And in the Great Hall, Ambassador Price addressed the new Galactic Assembly for the first time as its founding member. "The Council demanded that Earth surrender," she said. "They expected us to kneel in fear. Instead, we laughed. Not because we did not understand the danger. We laughed because we knew something the Council had forgotten." She looked around at the faces of 100 species. "Freedom is not given, it is taken. It is defended, it is shared, and it is always, always worth the fight." The assembly rose in applause. Humans and aliens stood together, united by something stronger than fear or force. They were united by hope. And somewhere in that great hall, the sound of human laughter echoed through the stars.